The first thing I wanted to do was play a clip about 4 minutes from a recent, what do you call it, presentation or video, I think, put out by Sam Bailey. That was, I think the point of the video was to respond to a piece put out by Reiner Fullmich. I think it had come about because he did an interview or some piece with J.J. Cooey, who works with Children's Health Defense, which was essentially spouting off more nonsense about endemic coronaviruses and infectious cDNA clones and other biologically implausible hypotheses. And so Sam was moved to make a video about this. And in particular, the last 4 minutes, I think really described where we're at better than anything that I've ever seen, better than anything that I could say. It's in the same genre of why are we doing this? Why do we keep fighting? Why do we keep opposing the so-called scientists in the so-called health and freedom movement? And what is this all about? So with that, I'm going to hopefully turn it over to Sam,
Many
and we'll
people,
take a
including
listen.
various.
So I'm going to skip the first part where she really lays out the story here and describes how there's no such thing as background endemic coronaviruses, so they can't be cloned and upregulated. And the whole thing is just more nonsense. And probably everybody has probably seen that. But the most important part was, for me anyways, was this.
Coronaviruses are like all viruses. There is no scientific evidence that they exist. We always get people who are upset that we call out Del Bigtree or RFK Jr. when they assert that viruses exist, and I'm sure it will be similar with my assessment of Reiner Fullmich. However, those of us in Team No Virus will continue to point out that they have not investigated virology or have failed to refute or even address our arguments. Reiner himself states that you have to get the facts right. So why is he talking about coronaviruses when the scientific evidence for them is absent? If virological science was on trial, would he swear that their experiments had valid controls and followed the scientific method? Claiming that there was no, quote, novel coronavirus is a step in the right direction, but is still misleading as it implies that viruses exist. Implying that viruses exist opens the door for claims of contagion, social interventions, and bogus pharmaceuticals such as, quote, antivirals and vaccines. And yes, I am aware of Reiner's recent discussion with Mike Yeadon, who we know has become increasingly skeptical of the existence of any virus. However, again, the virus existence issue is not a side issue. It is the issue when it comes to COVID-19 and all the other alleged viral diseases. We are not going to agree that it is better to concentrate on other aspects of the fraud which are downstream from the foundational fraud. SARS-CoV-2 never physically existed because coronaviruses do not physically exist, because viruses do not physically exist, full stop. Anyone claiming that they are onto the COVID-19 fraud because the jabs weren't tested properly, or the PCR cycles were too high, or there were lots of false positives, or the treatment protocols weren't right, or in Reiner's case, we were simply detecting background, quote, coronaviruses, is so far off the real problem, it's not funny. For many people, the acceptance that viruses don't exist seems to be too much for their worldview. But that's where we are. We've also exposed the fatal flaws in germ theory and contagion. Face masks don't work because there is no contagion and no viruses. The childhood vaccination schedule is a scam because viruses don't exist and bacterial pathogens are a fallacy. You can't get AIDS from catching HIV through sex because HIV does not exist as a virus. Antivirals poison and kill people because there are no viruses and they are anti-metabolic agents. To us, there is no point in showing people a little bit of the fraud. Just like we do with other alleged viruses, we dissect these 1960s papers claiming to have discovered coronaviruses and show that nothing met the definition of a virus and no independent variable was established through the scientific method. If anyone claims there are viruses, as they provide their explanations about the natural world or laboratory activities or court cases, we are perfectly justified in asking them to provide their scientific papers for their assertion. We agree with Reiner Fullmich that we need to establish the facts. Some of my colleagues have requested that he provides the scientific evidence for these, quote, endemic coronaviruses. So far he has said, despite the serious doubts about the virus theory, there's not yet enough to discard viruses altogether. Not enough what, we wonder? And it's not a scientific theory, it's a refuted hypothesis. Welcome to the world without fear of viruses and all the nonsense that goes along with it. If you enjoyed this video,
Yes, indeed. Support drsam.com. Everybody, if you haven't checked that out, you should. And that was just such a brilliant, well put together statement, summing it all up. There is no evidence for any of these viruses. There is no point in exposing some of the fraud and letting the core fraud exist. I could not possibly agree more than with that statement. And we are open, all of us, to seeing the evidence for these endemic background coronaviruses, which are somehow synthetically made into the infectious pathogen that these people keep talking about, but it never happens, not once.